Hello and welcome to another edition of Turned Out a Punk Splits. I'm your host, Damian Abraham, and once again, I'm bringing you a conversation with two people that have been on the show before, but we are bringing them back. They may or may not know each other, but I guarantee you a great conversation. Today is no exception, because on the show is Chris Mars, the legendary artist and drummer of the legendary Replacements. Also someone that has an incredible solo career as well that we talk about on today's episode quite a bit. Also returning to the show, friend of the show, dare I say, my mentor, the legendary Jon Wurster, who of course has played in numerous bands from Psychotic Norman to Superchunk to, there's deep stuff we could talk about as well, but also currently playing with Bob Mould. Also playing currently in the fantastic Mountain Goats with friend of the show, John Darnielle. And as I say, John is my mentor. John is someone that, he schooled me on music any day of the week. And to have this opportunity to bring together, well, John says it himself, his musical hero in Chris Mars with my comedy hero, my musical hero as well, but I can't play drums at all. But John is someone that I, as I say, very much respect as a musical mind, and bringing these two people together and just being able to sit here and hear this conversation. Whew, that is why we do this thing. And I say we because I cannot take credit for this idea. This idea of putting these two guys together came from show producer and guest booker extraordinaire and my little baby brother, Tristan Abraham. And if you want to get in touch with Tristan or this show, you can hit up turnedoutapunkpodcast@gmail.com. He also does an Instagram page and a Facebook page. There's a YouTube page and there's a TikTok page. All of those can be found at Turned Out a Punk. I have my own social media at Left for Damian. And I'm currently on tour with my band, talking to you from a hotel room. And the band I play in is called Effed Up, Fucked Up, I guess is a better way to put it. You can find us at fuckedup.cc on the internet. And we've got one more show. So it's in Nelson, BC. If you're there, I'd love to see you. If not, yeah, we'll see you around. We're going to England. We're going to England in October. So check fuckedup.cc for more tour dates. We also have Another Day new album that we have put out that you can find out more information all over on that website right there. All right, back to today's show. As I said off the top, today on the show, legends. Jon Wurster is currently going to be on tour with Mountain Goats. You can find out more information about all those shows, which is going to be in the description below, but at mountain-goats.com. They've got tour dates all over the United States. It looks like mainly southeast. No, south. Check the website. It's in the U.S. Also, you can hear John every week on the inspiration for this podcast, The Best Show. You can find out more information at thebestshow.net. But they go live with that show every Tuesday, 9 p.m. till 12 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can hear John on that. And trust me, he is funny. One of my like all-time favorite comedians. What else do I got to talk about? Oh, of course, Chris Mars has a brand new book, Rare Bird, which is a fantastic publisher that we've had guests on that have had books out on that publishing house before. But Chris has got a brand new book called 7:42 p.m. The Art of Chris Mars. It is a massive tome. Beautiful, beautiful book. As I said, Chris is one of my favorite artists ever. And if you are not familiar with his artwork, pick up this book, and it's a visual feast. And my God, how many pages is this thing? It's huge. It's ginormous. Looks so. I'm getting one. I'm definitely getting one for my birthday. It just happened, by the way. So if you want to give me a birthday gift, I got to get that for myself. I got some gift cards. I can get that with my gift cards. And also they've put out the album by Chris Mars, the Average album on vinyl, which had been previously available as a digital download on Chris's website, which is also definitely worth hitting up. But now you can get it on vinyl as well. A fantastic record. Chris's solo records. Oh my God, these things are awesome, as we talk about on the show. Anyway, I'm not going to ramble on. Check out all these guys and all their various projects, or both these guys and all their various projects. And I will see you on I'll see you later. All right, sit back, relax, and enjoy Chris Mars and Jon Wurster on Turned Out a Punk. Chris and John and Chris, welcome back to the show.
Good to be here.
Absolutely good to be back, Jen. Damian.
Well, I feel like this, as I was just kind of telling you off air, Chris, this to me is and John as well, this to me is like a dream kind of meetup happening because both of you are incredible drummers, two of my favorite drummers in all of music, but also John being one of my favorite comedians, Chris being one of my favorite visual artists. I feel like the two of you coming together, this is why I do this thing.
It's amazing. Chris and I have never met. He's one of the biggest influences on my drumming, and it's great to finally meet you.
Oh man, I appreciate that. That's a really cool thing to hear. Yeah, and I know of your work too, and I always like Superchunk, and I mean I know that's only one of the things. That's a more earlier thing that you did, but like you've done a lot of stuff I see. So, and I think your drumming is great. So,
well, thank you. You know, we shared managers. In the mid 80s, I was in a band that was also managed by High Noon, the Replacements managers.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
That would be Russ and Gary, right?
Russ and Gary, yes. So
they manage you guys too. I didn't know that.
Yeah, we didn't have a whole lot of luck, but they did get us a recording session with Jim Dickinson right after you guys. So that was amazing, and he loved you guys, especially you.
Oh, that's good to hear.
One of the first things he did was he played us your vocal of Cool Water. Do you remember that?
Yes. I think I did. That was my second vocal attempt ever. And then I think all he wants to do is fish, I think was one, like an earlier one than that we did in town here.
Yeah.
And wow. Yeah. Cool Water, man. I was struggling to get those notes.
Oh, it's so good though. And it ended up on a record. It was the B-side, right?
It did. Yeah.
Really late. Oh,
that's right. I think it finally did. Absolutely. They dug out pretty much everything we've done, I think, anywhere. Yeah. So yeah. It somehow made it on there. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think your vocals kind of sounded different on your latest record too, Chris. Like it seemed like I was telling John kind of before you came on how there's more of kind of like a Syd Barrett quality to some of the stuff on this last record that you did, or like kind of like John, you described as more of a prog kind of feel to some of the stuff.
There's some prog on this thing. Yeah.
Yeah, no. God, it's so funny. So if I think about, music in general, and I don't know if you guys can relate to this too, but starting out, I mean, well, you're a kid growing up, and so you're listening to anything and everything. And the way radio was structured back when I was, just a little kid in the 60s and 70s, it's like, especially like in the 70s, like top 40 was all kinds of stuff. You'd get quasi heavy metal, pop, just, soulful stuff, just kind of everything was sort of a little bit more mixed and mashed together. And so, like, obviously the prog stuff was in there too, that kind of, if that's what you're referring to, kind of the prog rock stuff, of course.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, so I guess my point is that, and you guys can maybe relate to that too. You grow up and then you hit an age, and then there's like, punk comes along and it's really a, kind of just a departure. It's such a departure from everything else that came before it. Not that it's not rooted in a lot of stuff like in the 60s, like the Trashmen and things like that. So it's not like it's 100% new, but the attitude and the look and everything about it. So then I fell into this kind of thing, and I think we did, and maybe a lot of other people, like you're trying to fit in somewhere else. So you're pushing yourself away from all kinds of other things that you were influenced by for a period of time. And then like now later in my life, it's like, well, I don't have to adhere to I mean, I like all kinds of stuff. I'll hear stuff now, that like from, I don't know, like a hit from the 70s that was a gigantic hit, and I completely forgot about it, and I'll recognize that, well, that was actually crafted pretty well, even though it would have been considered taboo to listen to anything like that at one time. So
right,
yeah.
It's interesting though when you go back and listen to bands like the Groundhogs, certainly like that early Syd Barrett stuff. Not that that's very heavy and stuff, but or that the Syd Barrett stuff, and then like even that first Fleetwood Mac record, like there's like kind of like a hard like blues rock, kind of
Right.
like
Yeah.
hard edge to a lot of that prog stuff, where
Right.
it is kind of proto-punk in a way. And certainly these were what these kids were listening to before they, spiked their hair and put on leather jackets.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you guys, like obviously just early Who. I mean, come on, that there's definitely like punk chords. My generation, it's like,
Mhm.
boy, how rudimentary and kind of punk is that?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what's great about the early replacements is that you can tell that you guys already had this knowledge of other, like you said, like whatever, classic rock or things that had come before. And the song that I'm thinking of that really displays the mishmash of those two things is that song White and Lazy. Do you remember this song, White and Lazy on
Oh,
Stink?
sure. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like Paul Butterfield Blues Band, and then it's a Circle Jerk song. It's amazing. Like hardly any band could pull that off like that. It's really impressive.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah, and it's funny to think about that album too. The Stink record that we did it was really, and I think I might have talked about this last time I was on the show too. But it was a time when we were trying to fit in with the kind of the hardcore emergence, and
Yeah.
and there were so many bands that were, it just you better play fast or you're just you're going to get booed off the stage kind of thing. And so I remember that was kind of probably our closest attempt to really, put the gas down and speed everything up and get as much edge as we could. And I think that was about as far as we could push it.
But
it wasn't even. It didn't come close to some of the real hardcore bands and stuff.
Oh,
But,
I think it hangs with a lot of that stuff. And,
does it? Okay,
and so
cool.
much of it is down to you. Like you're an incredible rock and roll drummer, one of the best, but like you're an amazing punk drummer too.
Oh, appreciate that.
It's
Thanks.
insane. Yeah. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you as well. I mean, I just I was kind of checking out and looking at some. Everything's on YouTube, and as we know, and so no, you're hitting them babies, and it's really fun to see the punk nature of your drumming as well.
Oh, thanks. I stole it all from you.
Yeah.
It's interesting how that kind of period happens, and it's like, I guess, post-hardcore, when a lot of these bands kind of return to those roots that they had prior to getting into hardcore and kind of incorporate, obviously, the lessons learned from punk and things like that into that sound. And, in particular, obviously what Replacements did, but also like Dinosaur being another one. And like, I think a lot of those bands, right, like had that kind of return to, all right, we've got this new energy, let's apply it to this sort of songwriting thing and see what happens.
Right.
Yeah. I guess whatever, by the time, I was out of it, was like 1980 to 1990. And I'm not sure. Yeah. What, your guys is kind of like a meat of activity, in bands and stuff. You're still doing it. I'm kind of out of it, but I'm out of performing and all that kind of stuff, but I still, like music and kind of getting reinterested in it in a different way. But, it's, thinking about like from 1980 to 1990 and what that was, or even late 70s to say 90, and then the grunge thing comes along, which has all kinds of different flavors, but a little bit of a different production style, with the real quiet little verses that go boom and they explode. That was kind of a little bit of maybe a new approach to it, but I just remember the sound of that, and then whatever. The kind of things being produced, from like 90, that first half of the 90s was punk, but then also kind of there was some interesting reintroduction of metal, like you were saying, Dinosaur Jr., and some of that stuff had some cool melody stuff, some different kind of craft. So that was cool too.
Well, John and I were talking like how it'd be so interesting to think of like, I was watching this interview with you from like a video request show on you promoting the first record. And there are all these people calling up, and the host is asking you about touring, and you really even seem like then you're like, I don't really have much interest in this sort of like traditional approach of what it takes to quote unquote make it in a band or as a band. And it's like interesting to see if you had kind of like played or fantasize about, I guess, if you had played the game and kind of like pursued that, where it could have gone, because that record's so awesome, and obviously the next record too. All your records are amazing, but like,
appreciate
there's a place you're kind of going with those early records, and it's like if you would kind of like obviously jump back into sort of the least healthy lifestyle in music of
Yeah,
a touring
yeah.
band.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it's one of those things. It's kind of, I think it was so, a 10-year period of very intense craziness. And I think if, by nature, and I probably mentioned this before, but by nature of just different people and how they approach or how they integrate into like touring and the business end of it. And, there's all these different aspects of it. And, my favorite aspect was always the studio. And I loved going in and realizing songs. And I did like touring for kind of like maybe, till the midway part, of our stint, but and then of course, when you get a lot of, uh, too much alcohol and maybe some drugs coming in and attitudes get all whacked out, that doesn't help things.
Right.
I just think that, there are some people get enough of it. And then I was somebody who, I liked it to a point, but I never really liked the aspect of touring so much. And again, it's more about sort of getting down to the nuts and bolts of coming up with something, and then realizing it into the studio. And then it was fun to a point to play it live too, but it got boring after a while. So I think
Right.
the repetition of touring and playing the songs over and over. It was always fun when we had a new batch of songs and then we'd kind of be working them out till we really got them down live. And then after that point, it was kind of like, you're playing, at least for me, it was, I'd be sort of, after about 10 gigs in a row, you're thinking of other things, like what I had to do, what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
It's just, it's just sort of automatic pilot, and almost to the point where you play the song and everybody else, it's fresh and they're there to see it. And I get that. And then you have these cheers after a song, and you're almost like, you're wondering yourself, like, what are they cheering about? Because I'm so bored. It's weird.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in any sort of like, pompous way at all. It's just kind of a thing that happens. I don't know. Yeah. I do. Can you relate to that, you guys?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And then you find yourself like back in Superchunk when I had reached that point also, I would look forward to the drive the next day because I could read. Like I had this new book I want to read. And it's like, wow, it shouldn't be like that at that point. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. You get a better understanding for those bands that like go out there and have that rehearsed shtick where they're just going out and doing the Broadway show every night.
Right.
But if you're trying to go out there and have a unique experience and present something to that audience that's like an honest expression, that is, like you're saying, it's draining. There's no way that you can maintain that because you got 10 shows in a row, 14 shows in a row, sometimes more. And it's like that's an emotional roller coaster to go on every night. It's much easier to kind of go out there and be like, thank you, Toledo. It's an amazing city to be back in.
Right. Yeah. It was very interesting. Like, and if you guys kind of hooking up with, say, a band like that, we played with, warmed up Tom Petty, for a little.
I was going to bring this up. Yes.
Yeah, for a period there, and it was the same thing for us because again, that was kind of a genre that I'd sort of departed from, and then now here it is. We're like later in our sort of major label career, and they're trying to groom us and get a hit and all, so they're kind of getting us back into stuff that we sort of grew up with. Although Petty was a little bit more kind of came in kind of during the new wavy kind of period, but still he's pretty traditional. And then seeing him play, it was like, wow, look at all this stuff they're doing, and the kind of twirling around and saying cool stuff in between. Everything is timed out so cool, and it felt spontaneous. To their credit, it felt very spontaneous the first couple times, but then again, after we're, watching them 10, 12 times in a row, it's like, okay, here comes the twirl. Here's where he says this. Here's where the lights go on in this, and then you realize it's just such a scripted thing. And that I think would be a very difficult thing to get excited about every time. Maybe it takes a type of person to do that, like maybe kind of more of a theatrical person.
I think it does. And that plays into, the volatility and just the originality of the Replacements is that all four of you guys, and including Slim, you guys were never that. And that's what made you so exciting. But it could also kill a career pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
Too.
Yeah. And that was it. And I think you hit the nail on the head there because of the nature of that kind of, wow, how do we keep this fresh? And, where is my mind wandering off to? And what are they even cheering for? And, then it's like to keep our own sort of sanity in that, too much alcohol sometimes would break that up, or mixing up the set list, or playing all covers one night, and pissing everybody off. I don't know. I think a lot of that stuff was to try to quell our boredom, and then, and I think if there's anything to like a kind of the major label sort of pressure that kind of comes along, that's another added thing of like, oh, well, now what's going to happen now? Or is the, were the kids inventing a game on the playground that we invented, and then now the adults are going to come in and add rules and make us play differently, and it's kind of scary, and so I think that kind of fucked us up too.
Yeah, well, none of you were rule followers, and I think that served. I think it served you especially well. Your art is just amazing, and it just seems like that, not lawlessness, but that lack of that railing against authority sort of thing has followed you into what you do visually, and I think that's just such a cool thing.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, and I appreciate your guys' spirit in all of this, down this whole road, of what we're kind of talking about here, and it really does get rooted in it comes about in that. Now it's like you don't want you understand that society has to have rules to function,
right?
But when it comes to creativity and art, and anybody trying to say, well, this is how you have to do, I mean, then everything is so objective at that point. It's like, no, there are no rules. And I think that is the attitude that I just loved about punk. And I think a lot of the artists that kind of came sort of during that 80s, 90s period that sprang up, I think is probably an extension for sure of the whole punk movement, just visually and attitude wise. And you're right. Exactly. It's about, I always tell that to anybody who's stuck artistically, there's no fucking rules. Fuck the rules.
Were you into artists like Winston Smith and Sean Carey and who else? Raymond Pettibon, those kind of like punk artists of that era? Were
they, if I can think, some names sometimes elude me, but was it kind of more like typical punk drawing type things, like you'd see like in a Ramones jacket or something, or was it of like that vein, or was it a little bit more refined? Or I can't quite picture.
Like Winston Smith did the Dead Kennedy stuff.
Right.
Very striking sort of angly kind of.
Yeah, I think I was never into comic books or anything like that, and I'm not saying that art is like comic books or anything, but and people kind of find that surprising a little bit, because it seems like it would go along with the whole fanzine thing and everything, and I was always just incredibly bored by, I think it's the repetitiveness of drawings, and how they go through a comic, and I want to flip through a book and see all kinds of art, so I'll want to, again, it probably just goes back to, not wanting to repeat and getting a little bored, but, artists like, Robert Williams and Sue Cole was another one that struck me, like when I saw her work, because it was so brash and different, and it was really politically heavy, and it was just like kind of raw, and I'd never really seen anything like that. But I think a lot of it goes back to, just growing up to, where art is kind of a little bit of a separate thing than music, although I don't understand why it all kind of goes together in my head. But there's, like a lot of the expressionist movement, George Grosz and people like that. Even, there's Stanislav Beksinski, H.R. Giger, of course. I was a big Alien movie fan, and then I discovered his art through that, so it's just such a mishmash of all kinds of different things that come in, but all of it, I think, leads to that same thing where these, they were groundbreaking artists that were doing something that really departed from the, the classical way of doing things. So, but I love Hieronymus Bosch, I think, was doing that stuff. And then it just stopped. No one did anything like that for hundreds of years. So he's right in there too, which is just amazing, because his work is so old. So interesting.
I think it's like the difference between, like the idea of like having a product, a consistent product that you're putting out there, which is the goal of industry, and I guess capitalism put like an ism on it, versus like an artist, which is sort of like the idea that you're not trying to repeat yourself, you're not trying to do the same thing over and over again every time. Like you're saying, there's no rules, so every time you go in, there's a new opportunity to try and make something completely different, and it's almost like what you need to do to be a successful band or to be a successful musician is kind of find a way to walk that line, but certainly lean closer to be providing a sort of reproducible, dependable product for people night in and night out. Like you're saying, Tom Petty did. I know we've been on tours, and it's like it makes sense because there's like hundreds of people trying to make this show happen every night. The last thing they need is an agent of chaos going out there and fucking it up.
Yeah.
The person's trying to light you and you're playing in the crowd, or you're not playing the same song, so the monitor guy has no idea how to do this for you because you're just like going off the fly, right? Like it's so in conflict for what a successful band is ultimately, which is going in there night in, night out, doing the Broadway show, rather than being Iggy and the Stooges and covering yourself in peanut butter.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know how to house. And then you have like the audience too that, grows to expect a certain thing. And, and then you decide, well, now do we just want to give people what they want, or do we want to press on, like you were saying, and try to, if you're have that inside of you that you want to keep getting challenged by different new things, that's a difficult thing. Yeah, I guess a character actor would be a great example of having a real fun career, because you could just jump around and do all kinds of different things,
Yeah.
And you can't, maybe it's a little harder when you're in the sort of the pop world or whatever, especially if you get really famous. Woo. Yeah, I can't imagine.
Well, it's funny because like I've been thinking, I'm kind of obsessed with this idea that like pre-Nirvana, like the dichotomy of underground music of bands that were like, not like people that are doing outsider kind of art or noise music or something, but like music bands. It's like REM on one side of the spectrum and Butthole Surfers on the other. And you guys kind of exist in both simultaneously. Where it's like this professional pursuit of pop melody, but also this complete chaotic thing that you can't put in a box, and you guys are like the bridge between these two completely divergent philosophies.
Yeah, I could see that as well. And I think if there's any, I'm sure you guys know too. You start out, and first of all, you don't even think that you could ever be in a band, because you see the bands that you kind of saw, heard on the radio and then saw live. Like, how the hell would I ever even learn to be that good? That must take so much effort. And then punk comes along and you say, oh, I can do that.
Right.
So then it's a doorway in, and then year by year, or month by month, year by year, inevitably you play enough, you keep playing, and you just get better. I mean, if unless you're just wasted and you don't pick anything up the whole time, which we kind of were, but even through that, I think we improved on our instruments.
Oh, so, definitely. Yeah.
And so I think that's just kind of an inevitable thing of just getting older and getting more experienced in playing. And so, maybe we had a little bit of that where we could have pushed it a little farther, but I don't, and then part of it is, again, it's that fear of becoming famous, and,
right.
And maybe, imposter syndrome, like, are we real, or
right?
I think that's all in there too. So I think we suffered from a few things.
Well, what's interesting about the Replacements is that a lot of bands, like, there'll be one or two agents of chaos or destruction in the band, but with the Replacements, it was interesting in that you all could do that. Like, each guy has at least a couple stories about like a crazy thing on stage, which is really interesting compared to a lot of bands where, like I said, it's just usually one or two guys. So that's a really interesting dynamic to have in a band where all four people could explode.
Yeah, and I think if I think about that, I think that would probably be rooted in, where we grew up and how we grew up in, in Minneapolis, just sort of blue collar neighborhood.
Right.
And in a lot of, and I'm sure this is just a normal story with so many people, but you in the back of your mind, you see what's going on, or where, the tract of a life and how people end up in a factory, which I'm not diminishing that kind of work at all, and whatever people's paths are. But if you don't want to go that direction, and you are kind of creative, and you're restless, and then we all kind of got into a little trouble too. We were actually, kind of, I don't know, I probably was on the kind of more of the lesser end of criminality, but I definitely hung around with types that got into some real bad trouble, and I think that's just inevitable growing up in a certain neighborhood where you have some kids that aren't doing as well as others. And so that nature is there to begin with. And a lot of it is maybe you don't believe you can do anything. And you're kind of trying to bust out of something. And I think we were all definitely trying to do that. The Stinsons and me and Paul, we all grew up, just kind of right in that same neighborhood. And in a lot of the kind of the pressures of kind of some of the kids around, like, putting you down, like, fuck you guys will never do anything. So you get a lot of negative stuff like that you want to say, well, we'll show these guys or whatever. And so there's that attitude too. But I think there's, when you carry that stuff with you. So when you're faced with like, gee, things are actually working, there's people coming to see us. Maybe there's a disbelief, and there's a self-destructive thing, that the seed that's still there, that maybe some people are lucky enough not to have that, and they can they can go past that, and they never have to deal with that because they didn't come from, maybe it's a different way of growing up. I don't know. I just know that, how, kind of the neighborhood that we were from. And so, and I can't really speak for the other guys either, but when you say that we all had that ability to kind of fuck things up and explode and do dumb things, and I think that's, I can see why that was there. If that makes any sense.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
How about you guys? So did you guys, is there anything like similar like that? I'm always kind of fascinated on, how people get into, why you guys, went on the path that you guys went
on. For me, it was, I just loved music, probably starting at like age 10, and there was never a plan B. So it just, I just plowed forward and kept plowing.
Yeah.
That's it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Which I guess is kind of what I was saying too, but I was way more long-winded. So
no. I think the one thing I've taken away from it, and I certainly acknowledge it now myself, is that a lot of things that draw people to punk, a lot of times the thing that draws people to punk rock is mental health. And there's that's why I think there's a lot of self-medicating, which you touched on there, that happens within this scene, and a lot of sort of self-destruction that also happens in this scene. And I think as through doing this podcast and talking to so many of my heroes, I realize how much of their art kind of came from not necessarily pain, but certainly a different sort of worldview than was considered quote unquote normal. And so, I feel like that's sort of like the unifying factor. And that certainly was my case. And I think if you were quote unquote well-adjusted, you wouldn't feel compelled to make anything. You'd be like, no, society perfect without me putting anything out there, like, I like Taylor Swift. I like Drake. I'm good. I don't need to do anything.
No, and I can definitely relate to that too. Yeah. I think there's that kind of insecurity that comes from like you said, depressive sort of situations. And for me, my brother was I talked about him. I'm sure you guys probably might know about a brother that I have that's schizophrenic, and I grew up just kind of being affected by that too, and just noticing things and how kind of phony things can be if you're not sort of quote unquote normal. Right. And and then punk, maybe that's what I was attracted to. I was always attracted to the monster movies and Outcasts and things like that. And and punk for sure had that feeling about it, like, this is, I feel like I can fit in here. Like I can relate to some other people. And it's probably because, like you said, those people, many of the people that were drawn to punk were dealing with things as well, in their family or whatever. So, yeah.
And it feels like punk was an escape hatch from society too, where all of a sudden all these things all these metrics that you're supposed to live by and strive for just became completely BS. And you're like, oh, all the cool kids are the dorks, and all the dorks are the cool kids. And like, it's like, and this is very problematic now, obviously in this day and age to say this, but it's the true red pill where all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm inside the matrix and this is all bullshit. And, anyone can make art, and I can make my own future, and I can write my own ticket.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you guys think about, it's when I'm looking at some of the AI stuff that's happening now, and it's so bizarre, where it's in its infancy and it's already like doing some very strange.
Yeah. It's already out of hand.
Yeah. And it starts with like, oh, I want a story about, this person and that person. Then it just spits something out. It's not necessarily good, but it's just the way it surveys the whole, trillions of bits of information all everywhere. So then, but the video aspect of this now is very strange. I don't know if you've seen some of the.
I've seen a couple things that are that are fairly disturbing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so bizarre that like it's almost like the AI brain or something is already hallucinating.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's coming
absolutely.
And it's all by just telling it like go here, and then it just goes.
Yeah.
And it's just starting. I mean, it's so new. So what's going to happen?
Total infancy.
Yeah. What's going to happen in 10 years with that? It's just, I don't know. I'm glad I'm not going to live forever, I guess.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh, I had a slightly off topic question. Chris, am I correct that with the exception of the drawing of Prince Gabe in the Pleased to Meet Me package and Bob's barbershop on the Shit Hits the Fans tape, you didn't really have a large role in Replacement's album covers? Is that correct?
That's true. I did.
And actually, why?
Yeah, there was one. There was the one that was. I actually made one. We sort of had a working title, and the working title I think it was going to be of was not All Shook Down, but the one Don't Tell a Soul. I think was the one, and the working title I think prior to that title was Dead Man's Pop.
Yes.
And so then I made, I was doing chalk drawings at the time. So I made like one that was, would fit perfectly in a kind of on a square record, as we were still doing vinyl then. And I presented it and it's like, no, didn't register it at all. So
oh,
it could have been, but no. And, and to tell you the truth though, I think for me, I can sort of focus on doing one thing at a time. I'm getting better at jumping around now as I get older because I think I'm a little bit more secure in the mediums that I use. But like when I'm insecure with something, I want to kind of keep doing it. It's almost like I don't want to let it go. So I'll focus on one thing at a time. And I think with the Replacements, I was doing some drawing, sort of quite a bit of drawing before that, but then the band started and I kind of set the whole thing aside because I really wanted to focus on this now, and give this my energy and attention. But so I don't think I presented a lot of art during that time to the band.
Okay.
And then maybe towards the end I felt it kind of bubbling up a little bit. So I attempted to get a drawing or something here and there, and a few did end up in there. But yeah, all of that really visual stuff really exploded, after the band, and it just all came flooding back. So
hey, how do you decide which of your own pieces is going to be on an album cover of yours?
Wow. Yeah. Some of them I just kind of did a doodle that sort of felt like a title I had. And those were just more little simple drawings. But sometimes with this last record, I had a piece that seemed to kind of fit what the feeling of the record was.
Yeah.
So then I just went ahead and put that piece on there.
Okay.
It's okay, and it's one of the rare pieces where there's a couple guys playing musical instruments, so
Right.
that kind of fits to it, I guess.
Wow.
Why on the cover of Horseshoes and Hand Grenades did you not do a full bleed with your art on it? Why did you decide to put it in the frame?
I don't know exactly why. I think it was kind of like a two things. It was like a photo shoot where it was the horseshoes painting on the wall, and then there was the grenades that were the sort of the pineapples with the dressed up as grenades. So I think it was just kind of a simple concept, probably not very deeply thought out.
Oh no, I've always wondered because by the time I got it, it was on a CD. I was always like trying to see the painting. I'm like, the painting's smaller on this thing. So anyway, that was my own.
Yeah, it's so strange. We still have a turntable set up, and then this last record I did is going to be coming out on vinyl. So I actually got a test pressing.
Oh, nice.
Haven't heard that. I mean, we just haven't fired it up very much. It's like, whoa. It is so different. The digital backslide. It's like, from really great fidelity and everybody seeming to want that kind of fidelity through the 70s and the 80s, and then CDs come along in the 80s, I guess, and then you notice that you can hear the difference. It's like, wow, I don't know about that. Things that you're very used to listening to on vinyl sounded very, very strange. But I think the production on CDs did get better as time went on. Maybe the first ones weren't as good, but so then it goes from there to whatever, like a little iPod, and then now it's just little MP3s and people listening to things in earbuds, and they're satisfied.
Yeah.
And but now is there a return to the fidelity and people wanting to really hear that full sound of vinyl? So it's definitely different, man. It sounds so much better, I think.
Well, I remember reading an essay about film and the idea that it was being diminished because people are watching it now on TV screens. It's like, oh my gosh, if the writer could only see what we're watching it on now.
Yeah.
Like the depth of field it does not matter at all when you're watching this movie on your iPhone.
Right.
and I just the vertical format. It's like, oh, that one gets me. I can't relate to that at all. But
yeah,
seems to be what took hold. Thank you, TikTok and all that. Jesus.
Well, it's interesting how technology affects like art or affects like the way people approach art or creativity, like production on certain records sounding weird after certain points because people got into different production techniques or people incorporating various new tools into their artworks. Like it's interesting how the two are technology and art are kind of in this weird dance, like you're saying with the AI thing. Not always a happy dance in some cases, but there's always a dance going on.
Yeah, no, there is always dance going on. And I think, just the way you can get in and out of recording now, where, when we were all starting out, it's like, okay, we got to book some studio time, and you got the big fat 24-track tape, and you got to get in a studio and have an engineer and do the best you can. And then now, I mean, and that's obviously the fidelity of that is still, the best. I mean, when you hear things that were really done well, that old way with the old gear, I mean, it stands out still. But it is pretty cool that with the samples getting better and better now in a computer, and you can really, you can have headphones on and you can be going into just this little tiny box, and you bring up an amp simulation, and it sort of sounds like there's a big giant amp in the other room. So yeah. It's kind of cool that you can. It's not, again, I don't think, I mean, maybe some people can do it better than other. I kind of hack my way through it, but it's cool that you can kind of at least experiment with ideas and fuck around, and not with very easy access. Maybe for better or for worse. Right? Too easy sometimes.
Yeah, so many options. There's too many options at this point.
God, there is. Yeah, no, exactly. It's so funny. Yeah, that reminds me. We were just watch. I don't know if you guys have seen it. There's one. We're fans of the first RoboCop.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing, classic.
And that was so punk too at the time, and it's just it holds up so well. But there's a RoboDoc. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's like a 4-part series on
No, that sounds
it's
great.
it's on Netflix, and it's there's a lot of kind of like crappy documentaries about great movies like Alien, whatever, stuff like that. But this one is really good because it has Paul Verhoeven and all of the Peter Weller and all of the people that, even down to just like sort of very one scene actors and actresses that were in it, and so it's all of the people that made the film are being interviewed and talking about it. And it was fast. It's like 4 parts and it goes by really fast. I recommend it. It
sounds fun.
cool. I don't know anybody that's involved with it, so I'm not plugging it. But
Well, I think that like Paul Verhoeven's one of those directors that like, talk about someone that could have several documentaries just made about him. And I remember like he picked up his Raspberry when he won it for Starship Troopers, right? Yeah, he like went and gave a speech, an acceptance speech and everything. And I feel a lot of his movies are really misunderstood.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah. And it is interesting hearing him talk. He's interviewed quite a bit during the documentary, and kind of his background and where he came from in Holland. And there was like a big, World War II bombing. And so he just saw as a little kid, probably 6 years old, dismemberment right in front of him. His dad's trying to like, don't look over there, don't look. And then he said in his mind, it was just like, oh, that's what a hand looks like when it's not attached to the body,
Wow.
And so he saw some stuff, but like you're such a little kid and you can't process that. You're not even emotionally there. So it's just a very bizarre sort of path. And so, I mean, he loves the blood and the gore and there's like a beauty in it for him. He's kind of expressed that. So kind of interesting. Yeah. It's fun to hear different people's, takes on what motivates them. And pretty cool stuff.
There was a documentary about American horror films that I saw years ago at like the Toronto Film Festival, and it said that like a lot of what preceded the sort of American horror boom with like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Night of the Living Dead and all that kind of stuff was seeing war footage on news and people getting accustomed to seeing like real violence and sort of, I guess, desensitization that kind of comes from that. And then sort of like that, how that influenced kind of the art that was coming out afterwards.
Sure. Don't blame the movies. Blame humanity.
Right.
Blame humanity. Yeah, exactly. Well, I kind of think the same with like, you think about punk and, Mark Mothersbaugh was on the podcast and we were talking about how much sort of cynicism there was to society post the shooting that they all witnessed at Kent State and the Kent State massacre kind of happening, and just sort of like that inspiring Devo. And I've always kind of thought like Watergate, Vietnam, Manson, like the whole sort of like 60s and sort of the disillusionment that kind of came into the 70s, like how much of that informed the sort of like sensibility that goes into punk rock. And obviously England has its own things that are going in there. Canada has its own things that are kind of going in there as well. But there's sort of this like worldwide post 60s hangover that leads to punk rock in some way.
Right. If I think about that too, with, where I remember watching footage of the Vietnam War, pretty much every night, with me and my brother and my couple of siblings, we'd be eating in front of the TV or whatever. And holy shit, what's happening tonight, and the fact that everybody was affected by that here, with the draft. And so that was such a sort of, it came home to everybody. And so the protests were way more robust and fuck this. And so that fueling of that counterculture that came along with, all of the music and the drugs and that whole thing that just, it's understandable. People are trying to like, break out of that matrix, like you had mentioned earlier. And then that leads to just a sort of, the end of that is not good either, because then there's just a lot of casualties of that movement, which I think punk comes out of. It's like a rebellion to the chaos in a way. Does that make any sense? I guess.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's like also these technologies that were kind of happening too, where all of a sudden, like you said, the zine stuff earlier, John, you brought it up with like the photocopiers that were kind of available to kids now, or tapes. Like how many kids, like Chris, you're saying, like he's just record at home now, but just like the 4-track cassette tape recorder for bands recording their demos, or just like being able to duplicate your own tapes without having to go find a pressing plant. Like it just, it kind of the two kind of like, once again, that technology art dance that's kind of happening, just allowed this thing to kind of take hold.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I remember. I just saw something too. They were talking. There was like a couple things like on YouTube where people are starting to pass mixtapes around again, and because it's a sort
Wow.
of a counter to the digital, like the Spotify's and all of this stuff, and so there's like the away from any sort of human touch anymore, and they want to kind of yeah, and I'm not familiar, but I just saw like a couple different things, but I thought that was interesting that there's a hunger for that sort of small human touch, human hands on type of approach in small networks that maybe could grow bigger in their own way, and it would be within their own vein that would be kind of unknown because it's not in the digital world. So it's kind of is a technical backlash coming? I think it's coming. It might be already here, right?
Yeah, I hope so. There used to be this anarchist bookstore, like show space record store in Toronto called Who's Emma, and there was this guy. I wish I could remember his name right now, but he like smashed the computer when they got a computer in there that gave people internet access to kind of use when they were at this record store in the 90s. Because he was like an ex-programmer, and he's like so anti-technology at that point that he just was so livid that this computer was in there. God, I wish I could see him and be like, man, you're kind of right.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I could see, I mean, if it's kind of true that, each generation rebels in their own way, to the previous one. I could see a kind of a rebellion coming and just like, back to something organic, back to just something sort of down to earth and just a departure from everything that is just saturating, the technology where it's just saturating everything right now. I could see, I could see if I was a young kid coming up and I was sick of everybody around me staring at their phone all the time. I think I would rebel.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because like you'd have to rebuild all the structures that these things have wiped out, like the weeklies, the alternative weeklies, like all these things that existed beforehand that these, technologies made irrelevant, that now it's kind of like, these things did serve a greater purpose. Right. And, and I feel like Replacements kind of invented this category of band in a lot of ways, but almost this idea that comes up on the show of a middle class band, like a band where you're able to do this for a living, but you're certainly not flying around in a private jet. Maybe even in a bus. Maybe you're probably still, in my case, you're still in the van. But how much of that economy was wiped out by these technologies? Like how much of the weeklies kind of served to help promote these bands coming to town? Record stores, obviously, to kind of, point the records out to the kids and serve as a hub to kind of get this information. Like this technology has wiped this out. And like you're saying, Chris, if this is coming, they're going to have to rebuild all of these things from the ground up again, which maybe that's going to be a great thing because they're going to build it in their own way.
Yeah,
that could very well be. Yeah.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
It looks like we may be on track to have the first vice president in history who has Tim on vinyl. Have you had any contact with Tim Walz ever?
Well, as a matter of fact, we're reforming because we're going to be playing at the president. No.
Hey, I knew it. Scoop.
It might come as a presidential decree, so you better watch out.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was pretty insane. It was kind of down to like a few there, and it's like, I guess I could kind of see him as vice president, and then it came down to like, oh my God, he got picked. What?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was pretty crazy. It's wow. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting bloodbath, I think. Unfortunately, because you just see the all of the shit coming out of the world already. I mean, it's only going to accelerate. It's going to be very nasty, I think.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's the world we live.
Yeah.
Well,
the Matrix.
Going back into the Matrix for a second. Did Jesse the Body Ventura ever come see the Replacements play?
Yes, he did.
As far as you know?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. He was, we saw him. He came in I think we were playing First Avenue. So it was probably maybe sort of mid-career-ish, maybe like right around we were going to get signed or just got signed or something. So playing a little bit, the First Avenue was a little bit of a bigger venue. And he came in with a couple like models on each arm, and I think he was still in the wrestling vein. He hadn't run, obviously, not in his political career yet, and he sat like at a back table, and yeah, so I think he came to see us.
Wow,
that's awesome. You recorded at Paisley Park. Did you ever run into Prince or anything when you're?
Oh yeah, recording? Sure. Yeah, he was. When the Replacements did like a couple songs there, and we didn't see him then. But then when I recorded my solo stuff there, I'd see him around because he was recording like across the hall. So I'd and there was a couple times where he came in and listened.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then he would and he was complimentary. It was really encouraging because I was scared out of my mind. I didn't know if I could ever do a record or whatever. So, but it was, very, very minimal. Obviously, he's very aloof, quiet, but it was very nice that he had a chef that he would bring in every night to cook for him. So there was like a kitchen there, obviously, and then he just came in and said, "Hey, there's food for you guys." So he would feed us and give us leftover food that he couldn't eat, and it was awesome. Yeah, he was great. Very cool. Yeah, I it was kind of cool. After he was very quietly charitable too, and I never knew that, but there were things where he would do like and not have anybody know about it, just completely on the sly, like go do a concert for the deaf.
Wow.
And because they really liked, just the beat, and they could feed off of the energy of him, and so he had a lot of fans from the people that were deaf, and it was pretty cool that and how charitable he was to all these different things that he never talked about, never fought. So no virtue signaling.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. Yeah, he did it very quietly.
He seems like he was like talk about someone who just wasn't made for these times in terms of like social media and what's required of a musician in terms of putting yourself out there. It just seems like everything about him and the way he lived was not ready for Instagram.
Right.
Yeah. And if you go back to what you were talking about, how that somebody who probably could do that dance where he was continued to innovate, didn't really care, but at the same time, it was like, oof, people just will go see him no matter what he does. So,
right.
Yeah, he was, he transcended, that's for sure. I remember seeing the last concert that he did. It was probably a couple years before he died. He played like a impromptu thing at this place. It's kind of like a First Avenue, kind of maybe 1,000-seat place, a bar called, was it the Mystic? I think it was in one of the suburbs around here. And he was doing the Third Eye Girl stuff.
Yeah.
So he did a couple gigs to kind of launch his tour. And oh my God, it was unbelievable. I mean, the band was nuts and just insanely talented. And it was very crazy, just big, giant guitar licks and just massive guitar leads, but really tastefully edgy. And it was nuts.
Yeah.
He was quite the talent. Yeah, quite the talent.
You guys probably know this better than I do because my musical history only starts with punk. But like, was there like a Minneapolis like scene, Twin Cities kind of music scenes prior to sort of punk? And I know Prince isn't part of punk, but I guess like sort of that period, because like there's just so much incredible music that kind of comes out of it. Like that interview I was watching today, you mentioned that band Magnolia, and I'm like, oh, I completely forgot about that band Magnolia. There's just so many. There's a deluge of bands, and it's not like other places where there's sort of like a well-known history prior to that leads to it. It's almost seemingly out of nowhere at a certain point.
Yeah, I think so. And I think part of it was there were really no venues. There was Jay's Longhorn popped up right at the end of the 70s. And that was the only place that would have, bands that were new wave or punk come through. And that was the beginning of it. But it was very slow for any of the other clubs to kind of want to, to catch on to this new thing, because they thought it was all just, was going to die, and there wasn't going to be, bands like the Police and Blondie would come in and play at Jay's Longhorn, way before when they were just cutting their teeth, so before they broke or anything. So he would get anybody and everybody that was starting out. It was kind of probably maybe the CBGBs of Minneapolis, I suppose, something like that, But And prior to that, I don't think there were, obviously punk was starting to get written about and in different, and of course the fanzine thing. So it was bubbling up, but there wasn't a lot until I think Jay's Longhorn came along, and then people could go see acts, and then that inspired a lot of other local people to switch, and get into this new.
Right.
So, and I know that happened to us as well. Right. Before that, it was like Lamont Cranston, they were like kind of blues oriented, sort
right,
of old school type of things, and then like the Suicide Commandos was one of the earlier ones before us. So yeah, it bubbled up, and then it kind of bubbled up quickly, I guess.
Chris, I've been playing the drums with Bob Mould for about the last 15 years, and I was wondering, cool. I was wondering if you had any fun Husker Du memories.
Oh man, absolutely. Yeah, no, Bob was really cool. In fact, it was me and Paul and Bob. Many times after gigs, sometimes we'd co-bill, we'd play together.
Yeah.
And then there were times where we'd go to see Husker Du and hang out and watch those guys, or they'd come to see us. So Bob was always hanging around. We were all, it was just the scene.
Yeah.
And then it ended up me and Bob and Paul would go over to Bob's place, and we'd just drink till like 4 a.m, and hang out. And, and I think a couple times I was riding a motorcycle, which was just nuts because I was drunk half the time. So, but I remember we'd put the motorcycle in the back of his van. I say, how do we get over that? I don't really want to ride my motorcycle. I'm pretty drunk right now. Yeah. He goes, well, I'll put it in the van. You guys can come over, and then when you sober up a little bit, then you can ride it back or something. So, yeah, we do stuff like that, hang out, and it was just all just kind of regular fun, hanging around, And yeah, so say hello to Bob, man. That's really cool.
Will.
I haven't talked to him in years, and you've been having a good time with that.
It's great. Yeah,
awesome.
He's amazing. He's such a great guy, and I can't believe I get to play with him. It's amazing.
That's so cool. Yeah, no, he's definitely gone on to write some really, really cool stuff. So.
Oh yeah. Oh hey, can we talk about working with Tommy Ramone a little bit?
Sure.
What was that like? I know you were a Marquee fan, but I was curious what it was like working on Tim with Tommy.
Well, when the Ramones first came out, it's like, man, I liked it all. So Tommy drumming, but I do think maybe the production kind of came along a little bit more, and when Marky joined, so then you could kind of hear the drums, and they were a little bit more out front. So maybe if I've said anything about wanting, it's they're both great, but with Tommy working in the studio, he was just really cool, kind of laid back, and friendly, and working on stuff. And he mixed the whole thing, I remember, through headphones, which was different. But yeah, it was just kind of one of those things where I didn't, I think around that time we were kind of in and out of the studio a little bit. So I'd come in and do a part and leave, and then someone else would do their kind of overdubs, and then we were all together kind of for the mixes. And so kind of a come and go type of thing a little bit. So, and I think, what did Pete Buck come in on that session, or I can't remember if he did or not. I think he might have played a little mandolin or something.
He plays on I Will Dare, right? The previous.
Yeah, which would have been that record. Yeah, exactly.
Let It Be.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Thanks for. Oh, God. So yeah, I got to see it now. It's so long. God, how many years has it been now? It's
you know
decades,
what?
Right, 3 decades.
I think yesterday was the anniversary of the release of Sorry Ma.
Holy shit! Really? Yesterday?
81? 81? Does that sound right?
81. Yeah. I didn't know that was the day. Wow, that's cool. Man, that was sure was fun going in the studio to begin with, isn't it? How about your guys' first experience of like, wow, we get to go in the studio and we get to play more than, we start to get to layer up tracks and shit and do overdubs or whatever. We didn't do many overdubs at the beginning, but it was all just pretty much live. But it just the excitement of that whole thing. Man, how about you guys?
Well, it definitely, for a drummer, it definitely puts your deficiencies out there.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
But I gotta say, in listening to Sorry Ma earlier today, it's like you were kind of fully formed already. Like you, you knew what not to play, which is so the opposite of almost all young drummers. Like, I was going to ask you if, having already been a songwriter and playing guitar, that must have informed you in terms of what not to play on records. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, and I would say, I guess we kind of wrote together a little bit of that early stuff because there were so many jams, and it was the time when we were together so much more, because we're trying to work stuff out and we're having fun.
Yeah.
And so I think and I appreciate that, saying that, but again, I the sound when you're sitting in the middle of the storm and you have all these, all the guys around you, and it's just this sonic, like, wow, and you can hear, how that is, you can never reproduce that feeling. And it was always such a disappointment when we went into the studio and I didn't hear that coming back out of the speaker. And like you said too, oh my God, that's, boy, I didn't know my timing was that off. So, but you do, the more you do it, then you start to learn a little bit too. Like, I notice after I do a roll that I slow down a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, because it took a lot of energy to do that roll. So shit like that, you start to learn. But it's very exposing, but man, fun at the same time.
I asked Jim Dickinson if you guys ever used a click track, and he said they would have laughed me out of the room.
Yes, that's very true.
And also, I know he did this to you. He did it to me too.
He gave you cold medicine. No, I'm just kidding.
No, the bass drum, like the big tube on the bass drum.
Oh, right.
Remember that?
Yep, I do. Yeah, he had a vision for the bass sound, and there was a big tube. I do remember that.
Yeah. He said I wanted Chris to think about his foot, and I guess it worked so well he had me do it, and I was okay. I wasn't as good, but that was such a weird thing.
I do, you're right, and I do remember that because, God, growing up and hearing very busy bass drums, like, being influenced by Keith Moon, but then when I first started playing, I remember I had 2 kick drums.
Oh, you did? Wow.
Yeah, and I was a double kick drum guy, and I was a little more moonish, and then I had to take that around and get a little bit more busy with my hands to kind of compensate with just the one kick drum. But I do remember being maybe, a little busy on the kick drum because of that.
Right.
And so I do, now that you mentioned that, going in and working with Jim, there was a sort of like a groove that he wanted to get in. And it was educational in that way, where I think I might have changed a little bit of how I approached the kick drum. So, hey, way to go, Jim, man.
Yeah. I remember sitting in Russ and Gary's office, and they had a I think a test pressing of Pleased to Meet Me, and Jim was there. Like, it was when we were kind of auditioning us to work on this thing, and he was talking about this new kick drum technique he developed with you, which you may not even know about. I don't know, but
I want to hear it, because
it was basically, I can't remember. It was something as simple as, like, instead of going like doom, boom, 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 it was just like boom, 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 and somehow he arrived at this thing where this is the cure for all of rock and roll's woes. Was this pattern. And I just thought that was funny that he thought about it that much.
That's cool. Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. That's a cool story. But I do, now it's interesting when that does jog a couple things. And it was the first time too, where I feel like I could really, the drums were very prominent in that studio.
Yeah.
And I could hear them in the headphones and even in the mix, and they were coming back, in the mixes in a different way. I think, maybe there's a little more production going on that record for the first time. I don't know. Yeah. But so that might've been, part of it too, where you can, wow, I got to maybe pay a little bit more of attention. Also, I think there was a difference, if I think back, about how we were adjusting to Bob not being in the band.
Right. That's big. Yep.
And I grew up, by my whole beginning of my drumming in any, real shape or form at all, started playing when me and Bob were playing together. I mean, I was doing, little things without a band and, playing drums, kind of on my own. before that. But once I got into a band, that he was the guy I fed off of all the time. And so he could drum himself. And so he had
Oh,
a really good sense of rhythm. Bob was just a very rhythmic guy, even though, he goes off on the crazy wild tangents, but he had a great sense of rhythm. So I would always play with him, and he was the closest to me. His amp was the closest to me always in our setup, whether we were practicing or playing
okay.
live. So I would always hear him the best as well. A lot of drummers play with the bass, and
Yeah.
I get that. And I do remember hearing reading a little. It was an interview with Charlie Watts, who said he also played with the guitars. So just a
Yep.
little bit of a different approach. So I guess a long-winded way of saying when Bob was gone, that might have been a little bit of a different sort of play off of each other that we had, that I kind of had to adjust to in a way, if I remember back on that, because Paul had a little bit of a different style, and then Slim came in and his style was quite a bit different than Bob's. So yeah, interesting.
That's cool.
Little bit of a change happened there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Wow.
I was thinking about it today, like, and you kind of touched on it there, but the isolation you guys were recording in later on, like, I think you guys could almost be studied as like the life cycle of a band and what you're going to go through, where, like you're saying, in the beginning, you're all jamming together. And then at a certain point, it's going to become less democratic and creatively more isolated. And that's just, it seems like, like obviously knowing about your band prior to being in the band I'm in, but just watching that same thing happen to us over the years, it just feels like, I don't know, it's just something that kind of happens to bands, or maybe not every single band, obviously, but like it's something that's almost like bound to happen at a certain point to a band. And it's like a perfect case study for bands to kind of like be like, okay, this is what's going to happen to us eventually.
Yeah, it could be. And I think, again, it goes back to that where you're kids and you're having fun and your expectations are, not that high. You're just having fun. You're playing gigs, but then you inevitably things start happening. I mean, we were lucky enough to have Paul in the band, and he was presenting a lot of cool tunes and ideas, and then we were all just doing how we bounced off of that in our own way. So it was a cohesive thing at first, more so. And then, if you go through, like I think you're talking about, Damian, where time goes on, the repetition of the things, sort of the grind of certain things, and the touring, and how, the perspective of, the aspects of the business and show business, whatever the fuck that is, kind of presents itself. And I remember Paul would have a joke like, we'd be so disillusioned sometimes, like, is this what it is? You kind of reach a certain point, and then Paul would say, excuse me, I have to go take a show business. And I mean, that was kind of like, yeah, we all like, so it's just, I don't know. And I guess, again, there's different people that take it different ways. And I know people that weren't in the band that can't get enough of the road and can't get enough of being around it. So I think personalities actually absolutely come into effect with all of those things. So if a band starts to kind of falter, is it because of boredom, or is it because it's a disillusionment, or you kind of reach a stage and it's not maybe not what you thought it was going to be, or
Right.
all those things. I guess that's a pretty common thing that people go through, I guess, too.
Well, I guess that's where that other gear we talked about earlier on would kind of come in, and that's where, like, the people that want to do this as like sort of a performance show thing where you can go out every single night and no matter how you're feeling inside, just put on that show, versus, no, I'm not feeling it. Like, this is, I don't think I can deliver what people need from me or expect from me at this point. Like, I think that's where that extra, like Chris Shiflett from the Foo Fighters was on one time. And I asked him if his former band could have done what the Foo Fighters did, because they had some minor hits on K-Rock kind of thing. And he laughed. He's like, there's no way. We had nowhere near the work ethic that's required to do what the Foo Fighters do. And I'm like, oh yeah, there is something that, like, to be able to go in and go out every single night and do that thing, it's going to, it takes something.
Yeah, well, that's cool. With you guys, and you guys are still playing and active. And I mean, obviously we're all getting older. what's your experience? For me, that's kind of gone on a different path. And I'm kind of maybe more excited about music now and having fun making it than I've been in a lot of time. Does the excitement level, can you guys maintain that pretty easily when you go out and perform now? Is it, what's the attitude there, I guess?
First, I want to say, speaking of age, I think it's unfair that you're 59 and have never lost a single lock of hair. So I just want to say that.
Yeah. Don't, hey, John, come on, please. Not in this house. Not in this house.
Yeah. And I don't mean to. I mean, my God, I shouldn't. It's just it's age schmage. I mean, who the fuck?
Yeah,
cares?
I feel that. Yeah, I feel.
You know what I mean? Look at whatever the Stones. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
It's more and more irrelevant. But at the same time, it's a lot of time doing something. So
Yeah.
I think about if I would have stayed in it and not gone on a path I've done. I don't know. Maybe you go through different incarnations as you move through it. So, but I won't ever know because I never really did that. So,
right.
Yeah,
I think it you got to find ways of making it fun and interesting.
mm-hmm.
And it's not always easy. I've sort of been touring just nonstop the last 15 years, and you just sort of hit the same places over and over again and every year, and you just got to kind of find a way to make it interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I do think, I've been sober for decades now.
Yeah.
And I think that adds a whole new level of finding fun in ways that I probably couldn't find when I was, in the throes of being hungover and things like that. That doesn't, that's not good for, finding simple fun. I guess I shouldn't call it simple, but just finding enjoyment in doing what you're doing, and that I guess that gratitude thing that comes through, and you're just grateful to be doing what you're doing, and that maybe was something that went away with too much booze. Your attitude gets messed up. So
everything's annoying.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I could see that, continuing on and going on, and I don't know where you guys are as far as, sobriety, and that's not my business. So, and I'm cool with that. But I think for myself, I could maybe look at that differently. But then again, I don't know. I don't know. I might get really bored and sick of it just the way I did back then. I just don't know. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I guess you get too much of anything, right? For me, I can look at my easel and say, I don't ever want to sit down in there again.
Right.
But then a week goes by and it's like, oh, I got this idea. And then you launch yourself into it. So yeah.
Yeah. I think it either comes back or it doesn't, so I think a lot of people, they do stop for whatever reason and it just doesn't call them again. It just doesn't.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing, like how some, I don't know, great bands wrote just a period of just incredible things, and then all of a sudden they're not putting that, like they wrote themselves out or something, or they lost their inspiration, or I don't know what happens there, but that's an interesting aspect.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's like an aspect of settling in, like you described earlier, where you just like get used to it, get accustomed to doing things a certain way, and forget that there's no rule book, and that every time you go out there, and it's almost like there's two different sides to it too. Like, like there's like the side of creation, like the writing the songs, recording the songs, crafting it, and then there's going out and doing that repetitive thing of performing it every single night. And I obviously love both in different ways and hate both at times in different ways, but it's almost like completely different mindsets, where one isn't necessarily about creativity so much as it's about conditioning and endurance, I guess. And the other one is, a lot more creatively fulfilling.
Yeah. I used to refer to drumming as more of a sport sometimes than it was.
Oh yeah.
Agreed to that, because exactly, and I can't speak for slinging a guitar over me and jumping around with that every night. I mean, that's not, I get to sit down at least if I'm drumming, right?
Drumming though is the one thing, other than I guess a virtuosic acrobatic lead singer like myself, but like it's like the one place where like every night it's like you're beating the shit out of your body, and those like it's physical, like you're saying, it's an athletic thing you're doing every single time you go out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was towards the end of, and I think I had a bad habit too of, you learn how to play a certain way, and it's kind of hard to break out of that and adjust. And I know I made some adjustments through playing with the replacements, but towards the end, the one thing I could never get out of is hitting the drums as hard as I could.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
so,
I hear you.
I would use the butt end of the stick, and tape up the bead part, because they'd just break all the time. So I ended up switching the sticks around, and then I would also just hit the hell out of the kick drum. And to the point where I was limping off stage towards the end, because I wore like a ridge on the back side of my kneecap.
Wow.
From it stopping at the same spot all the time.
Right.
And so I was like, wow, I don't know if I'm going to, I don't know if I could do. And then I remember trying to I got to ease off on that. But by the end of the show, I'm doing the same thing. I couldn't get out of that, hitting them as hard as I could type of thing. So that's a skill in itself. Makes it more of a sport when you can't break out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. I've, just as I age, you just kind of, and Bob Mould and I talk about this a lot, where you just kind of get these tricks where you kind of just glide, you're not digging in, and you're, same with drums too. It's more in the wrist now, as opposed to the thunder hit. So you just got to figure out a way to look like you're still on 10, but you're sort of on 6.
Yes, exactly. I could see that. Yeah, you would just adjust it. I mean, because there is a way to really be dynamic and look like you're fucking killing it, I mean, like if you look at Buddy Rich, but like some of that stuff was just really painting the drums, but he was just wailing. And but just the way he'd hit the rim with the stick, and it sounded really dynamic and loud. And some of the people that came out of that school, like the jazz school, I know like John Bonham was a guy that was kind of graduating from that, that era into. And if you look at how he drums or listen, there is a lot of that dynamic, almost jazzy stuff that goes on, even though it's very heavy.
Yep.
So it's kind of an interesting different mindset. But then of course punk, it's just like, I got to use my whole body and just kill the drums and ruin them or whatever. I guess Keith Moon was a pretty hard hitting drummer too. The way he was a big influence on that. But God, yeah, it's interesting how what's a way to, for me, I could never break out of that.
I went and saw the Circle Jerks Descendants tour last year when it came through. And just the studying contrast between Joey C's drumming and the Circle Jerks, where he's like an athlete, like trained, like looks like it, versus Bill Stevenson, who looks fantastic, but definitely does not look like an athlete. And Bill's like the lightest hit versus Joey, who murders it. And it's just, they're both amazing, but like completely different.
It's different. Yeah. That's what's cool about it. Everyone's got their own thing.
Right, their own thing. And then, it is when we're talking about microphones and amps, and you don't really have to, like you said, finding Bob Mould, you guys finding tricks to kind of make it look like you're doing it, going a lot harder than you are. But I mean, and you do have microphones, and you can just have them turn that shit up, I would imagine. Too, So there would be, that brings me to, did you see the interview with Howard Stern and Bruce Springsteen?
I saw a little bit of it. Yeah.
That to me, that was fascinating, because the way he sang, he explained it. And like, because Howard Stern is like, come on, man, how do you do at your age? You're still going out there and you're playing these 3-hour shows. How the fuck do you maintain? And he explained how he's not straining at all.
Yeah.
When he's singing, did you see that bit? And I thought that was super fascinating how he kind of goes back and he does this thing, but he's not blowing his voice out. It's more of a sound, and then it's turned up in the microphone, and it sounds like he's just belting it, but he's not.
Right. Yeah. It's
very interesting.
It's a science. Speaking of,
I wish I had known that.
Yeah. Now, you used to sit very high early on, and then you didn't at the end of the band. What was that about?
Yeah, I think that was I think maybe when I was starting out, Yeah, you're right. I would do that. And it was like, it was probably maybe the speed at which I was playing. The earlier songs were a lot faster.
Yeah.
And so maybe I wanted everything tight and kind of like maybe, sort of trying to like tackle the drum set as I went at it,
Going
and then
down instead of
and then I
up.
remember being really drunk and I would kind of lean over it while I was, doing a roll, and I smashed myself in the eye, on the up stick and on a roll, and it was just like, luckily I was kind of drunk, so but it was blurry for about 2 weeks.
Oh no.
I thought I really
shit.
fucked my eye up. But so I think that was an impetus to kind of get away from my own sticks.
Wow.
So I kind of lowered things and tried to learn how to play. Another thing I think was when I lowered the seat and got the snare drum at a certain height, it was much easier to get that kind of rim shot going.
Right.
Because the angle changed for me, so that was kind of a different approach. And I think also I was very influenced by watching Topper Headon a couple times.
Oh,
I've
yeah.
seen some Clash videos and
Yes.
kind of how he's set up, and he's just like his hi-hat was really high, and
Yeah.
man, that is
So great.
awesome. Yeah.
John, you brought up this thing to me that blew my mind one time on a podcast, and I think it's an episode that actually never aired, but where you talked about the internal metronome that all songwriters have, and sort of the challenges adjusting to each singer
Oh, the
and songwriters.
rhythms. Yeah. Built-in kind of rhythms. Yeah. Just getting to play with different songwriters over the years. They all kind of have their own kind of this band I play in, the Mountain Goats. Our main guy has this. His kind of go-to rhythm early on was like gung, 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 gung. And then Bob has a very kind of driving, kind of strummy thing, and it's really interesting that it's just sort of it's in their DNA. Like, it's not something that they really learned; it's just something internal that comes out. And I think I can hear it a little bit in your natural rhythms too. Do you have any knowledge of that, or is that just inborn?
It's really cool the way you talk about that. And I think that would really be fun for a drummer, and doing all the many different things that you've done. That would be definitely something that would keep it more interesting.
Yeah.
And I could see that, that's really cool. Obviously with me, the Replacements was the only band. I think I did something with Golden Smog after that, and then my solo stuff. But my solo stuff is, pretty much kind of rhythmically in the vein of what I already knew.
Yeah.
But as far as like an internal thing, I think for me, it's just listening. You hear things that you like, certain drummers, or certain sounds, or dynamics in the way a song moves, and how kind of like a little accent will lead to another part of a song. And I think the drummers for me that did that, the way I would hear I guess like Topper Headon, or the Elvis Scott, the Attractions drummer for Elvis Costello,
Pete Thomas.
And I think even I was listening to Stuart Copeland and some of his weird little rolls. Sometimes it was like a lot of reggae stuff too that I never gravitated towards. But when he was rocking out, he'd do some cool little weird little accent stutters. And so all of that stuff combined, I think it just ends up, you start to get your own Bible of little things that you keep in mind while you're playing. And then that just becomes how you play. It is kind of hard to break out of it once you ingrain yourself that way. So I can see how a lot of different people learn it a certain way, and then that's kind of how it is for them. That's their rhythm. That's their way. That's their cadence, I guess.
Totally. Yeah. Do you plan your drum fills? There's one specific one I want to ask about, which I think is one of the greatest drum fills of all time. It's that song "Nevermind" on "Pleased to Meet Me." And it's kind of the final drum roll of the song. It goes kind of back into the words I thought I lost part. It's just this amazing drum fill, and it's like a whole movie. It's so up and down, and it's
wow.
Everything.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Oh, it's incredible.
I think I might know that what you're talking about. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's like a kind of a where it's a little ba or something like that. And it's not really, I don't know what it was. Was I playing with the guitar or something? There was another maybe rhythm going on in the background there, but I appreciate that. Yeah. It's so funny. And I'm sure you have this too. You got both of you guys whenever you listen to things that you've recorded, and how sometimes an idea can come at the spur of the moment, but then it has a lasting quality. It's like,
exactly.
I'm glad I thought to do that at that last second.
Yeah. So that was just something that happened in the moment, I assume. Is that
probably,
right?
yeah. I think I was
so
just
good.
playing, and we probably did, I don't know how many versions, and maybe I didn't do that 10 times, and then maybe thought it sounded a little bare and needed something, so that just whipped out.
Oh.
Yeah, but I appreciate that though.
Oh, it's
but
so great.
and I'm sorry, I'm not familiar. I can't go down and like dig down and say, God, you guys did this and that. I've seen what you guys do, but I'm not, all the way down deep knowledgeable. So I apologize.
Oh no, this is about you.
Yeah, this is definitely for both of us. I think this is a good chance to dig in deep about a lot of nerdy stuff. So I'm more than happy to just listen to you and John talk.
All right, gone deep.
Deep here. So I'm going to go deep now on my book coming out here. I got a 240-page book that's about to get released. Going to be released through. It's plug time. Is it plug time?
I do an intro too, where I plug and I put the link in on the episode.
Awesome. Okay, so I don't have to do much of that, but yeah.
No, I don't. I'm not gonna. If you want to, please go ahead. But I also do not feel pressure. There will still be an actual hard plug for the book.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, no. So I'm excited about it. Yeah, Rare Bird is a cool company, but they're also going to do the record too. So it's kind of ties together with the music thing. So they're doing both. So very, very excited about that.
That's great.
I love the record. I think the record's fantastic. So I'm stoked to get that on vinyl and hear it. Like you're saying, there's a difference to it. Is there any thought of reissuing those first two records at some point?
Man, I'd like to re-record some of them.
They're good. I don't know why you're saying that.
Take the best ones and try to now reissuing the first two though. Polygram put them out, so my God, I don't know where I would begin to look for those because they don't exist anymore. So it's all on a shelf somewhere.
Wow.
I don't know what could be done about that. They own them, and who knows where that is now. So I should try to track it down. To tell you the truth, it'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, definitely. Like I think, in spite of what you're saying, I think they are fantastic records and very cool and so different than the stuff you do afterwards too. So it's not like, there's a need to have them out there. It's what I'm basically trying to get to.
Appreciate
for
that.
For me.
Thanks, man.
But when it comes to, like this old history that you have and all these sorts of histories, like obviously, like you've got like the solo career, which was kicking off. Like there was sort of like, was there pressure for you to tour it at the time of the label?
Yeah. When I first of all, I was just scared out of my mind again. I'd never done playing guitar and singing. It's like, what? Talk about I'm an abs. If I was an imposter in the Replacements, I'm really an imposter. No, I didn't. So I said, I'm not worthy of this. How did I get a deal? What? So I was very frightened. But then you go in, and then one thing leads to another, and you start having fun. But after that got released, it did kind of it sort of, I guess it turned out better, a little bit better than I thought it would. The first one. And then, there was a lot of pressure for me to go out, and I was not of the mind to do it. I wasn't in that place anymore, in that space. And I think the visual stuff was just like, man, there were so many things that I was seeing, and I wanted to kind of, get out like other artists and visions I had. And then I'm starting to see this whole other world and avenue that I was so hungry to explore, I think, right around that time. So it was kind of a simultaneous, wow, this is fun to do songs that I was never allowed, never really able to do with the band, for various reasons that I'm not going to blame anybody. It's just kind of a mode that we were in. The dies were kind of cast with our roles in the band, and you guys know how that is, I'm sure. So it wasn't really, I know Tommy was hungry to do stuff and did some great stuff after too, and so that was a thing that I wanted to kind of get out of my system. But then the art was just the visual side was really starting to come alive, and you can't stop it.
Yep. That's great.
You can't stop it.
Was having J.D. Foster on those records important because of this sort of like, perceived imposter syndrome? Like the fact that like, because you could, played bass on that stuff yourself,
Yeah,
but
I think for me, I hear the bass now and I'm much more conscious of it. But I think because I played with Bob so much those years, I was a drummer that played with the guitar more than the bass. So I didn't hear the bass. Now, when I listen to some of the stuff that Tommy did, I have a complete new appreciation for it. I go, wow, like Swinging Party,
Yeah.
like fucking A, man. That is like, and he just did so great on that. So I was like, whoa, man, how did he do that? That was so
Yeah.
cool. So certain things I just never heard in real time. And I think I was, for that reason, intimidated to pick up the bass and do anything myself because I couldn't really hear it. So I said, I'll try this other stuff, but I'm not going to attempt the bass. So that's when I got JD,
Okay.
who worked out great. So he was a great guy to work with.
Wow.
John, I could punish Chris forever, so I don't want to step on you if you have more questions.
No. What was I going to ask about? There's this one of those replacements kind of picture books. And there's a photo of you wearing a hootenanny jacket. What is that about?
Wow.
Did you make it yourself?
I don't even know what that is. I don't know what that is.
It was during it's a photo shoot in Hoboken. It looks like it's probably hootenanny era, so at like 83.
Sure.
And it's like a jacket that looks like it was kind of hand painted, the cover.
Oh,
it's
fuck.
Amazing. I'll get a picture to you somehow.
Get a picture because it could have been that I whipped something up at the time and I don't remember. So,
All right. And speaking of, how did Grant Hart come to do that cover?
I don't remember. That's another thing. Okay, so with album covers in general, there's a graphic element to them, and especially Hootenanny. It's a very graphically natured, and visually for me, I struggle with the graphic side of art, and I appreciate when it's done well. It's like I see it, but I probably was just oblivious, with some of that stuff. If you ask me, hey, do a drawing, I'll do a drawing. But with a layout like of a record in any sort of graphic sense, I was really oblivious about that stuff.
Okay.
It's funny you say that because like I think a lot of people just assume they're the same discipline, but they're so different.
Yeah. For me, they are. I can put I'll put symbols and letters and different things, for compositional elements in paintings. But for me, it's again, there's no sense of like you have to have any graphic sense. It's just all whatever I want to do and whatever kind of maybe fits in the painting as a whole. So I guess that's kind of a graphic sensibility, but when it comes down to no shading, and just like a color against a color with a hard line, then that throws me way off.
Okay.
I have to like finesse and put lighting on things and that's kind of where my mind goes. So I think that's probably why there's a departure in the graphic sensibilities.
Interesting.
And almost like they're you can see how they'd be different because one's a sense of like expression and self-expression, and one's almost like, I don't know how you phrase it, but trying to draw people in. Like it's not so much about putting something out there about the self; it's about trying to strip the self away and make the self sellable to people, or like arranging the art in a way to make it communicate to the consumer. I don't know if I'm expressing this in the way
I think there is. I mean, if you think about like, Andy Warhol and some of those graphic sensibilities and some artists that, explored that through the pop art movement and all that, I have an appreciation for it. And I think, there's a lot of expression in simplicity. That can be a powerful thing in a lot of ways. So I understand that it can be. It's just never been something that was inside of me, but I appreciate it. One of the things I appreciated so much when I'd never really seen Warhol's stuff in person, and when I went to see it, I realized what a great colorist he was. Like the colors that he chose to put on things were very thought out and very tastefully done. I like beyond what you just can't get it when you look at it in a magazine or anything like that or online. So, same with like Francis Bacon when I went to see his show that came through the Institute here. how incredible he was with color. I couldn't believe how
Wow.
good he was. It was just like, whoa. Now I understand it on a whole nother level. You'd really have to see stuff in person, as we all know. You gotta
Right.
see that stuff firsthand. So
Yeah, it's like as good as technology has come, it still can't reproduce what the art's going to do to the human eye in the
no,
same way.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, yeah, just going into this day, going into a museum and seeing, how even brush strokes can land on the surface.
Hmm.
And it's like how somebody signs their name, every one is different the way they
Yeah.
approach it. And just, that element alone can be a fascinating thing.
Which I guess is why you need the layout people, because the art won't read in the reproduced context that it's going to be put out there. So you need the layout to make it read as well as possible to people. Once
Yeah.
again, I'm not sober, so this is a very THC addled mind that's coming up with these thoughts. So
That's all
I
right.
apologize.
No worries at all. No worries at all. Yeah, no, and then there were the great thing about album covers growing up in the 70s were some of those records that like Frank Zappa, and just fuck, these cool fucking, in-depth illustrations and paintings. And, that was a great thing about that size of a record that,
Yeah.
you could listen and thumb through have some visual side to it too, which was pretty cool. I loved when I first, that was another thing, like those early Ramones records and looking at the drawings in there, the little punk drawings.
Yeah.
Like that was like, wow, this shit's fucking cool. Yeah. It all adds to kind of the sound when you're listening to it.
Well, or even like we talked about last time, that Hammerhead, and I think AmRep has always done an amazing job of this. Is kind of like having the art that I don't know, it's still in service to the music, obviously, but it also stands alone. And those picture discs
Yep.
with the Hammerhead one with your art on it, like I love that record. It's still visually so captivating.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and Tom's cool too. Tom Hazelmeyer.
He's great.
Yeah, yeah, and well, we hang out from time to time, but he has that. I think he has a good graphics sensibility about him too. So,
Oh yeah, going back to those first Halo of Flies records, those records look so great. Like especially compared to a lot of people that were obviously just doing things very much by the seat of their pants.
he was thinking about it more. Tom definitely puts a thought into that and effort. Yeah, no, he's got a mind for that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. He got stuff done.
Well, I was going to ask you, like, obviously you guys are touring the world probably by this point, but there's that documentary that came out a couple of years ago about the Baldies and the rise of sort of like the anti-Nazi kind of skinhead scene in there around bands like Blind Approach. Were you guys on the road when that stuff's kind of kicking off, or did you see kind of like a rise of sort of that sort of like bonehead presence that shows back there?
What year would that have been exactly? Because then maybe you can jog a memory.
88, 87, I guess, maybe.
88 or 87. And you're talking about an anti-Nazi sort of punk, a hardcore type of thing, or?
Yeah, it came out. I guess there was this hardcore band, Blind Approach, and they eventually went on tour with them. But there's a documentary that I guess Minnesota PBS would have done, or Minneapolis PBS, that was about this gang, and it was like a Native American guy, a white guy, a black guy, and they formed this like anti-Nazi skinhead gang, and then they went on tour with this band Blind Approach and kind of formed little pop-up chapters all over the place, which gave rise to the anti-racist action and all sorts of things afterwards. But
oh man, that's really interesting. Yeah. But if it's anti-Nazi, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I think the documentary is definitely worth watching. I think it's on YouTube. If that's where I saw it, so hopefully.
Yeah, I gotta check that out. That sounds interesting. No, I that one kind of maybe that slipped me. And I think if it's 88, yeah, and that's kind of getting towards the sort of the end of what we were doing. So maybe, yeah. It's funny how I don't know if towards the end of the band for me, because I think I had other things I wanted to do. I was already starting to switch gears a little bit, creatively and vision what I wanted to kind of do. That I had. It's kind of what you were talking about, John, where you're playing and then you're thinking about, I want to get back to my book, you know?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And I was definitely doing a lot of that where I was starting to draw more in between towards the end of our touring, you know, end of the 80s. So I couldn't wait to get off road and start, you know, drawing and trying to paint and do things like that because it was really starting to spill out. But so maybe musically, I started to psychologically a little bit depart at that
Right.
time. And so I think I missed a lot of stuff going on. So that could have been why I just wasn't aware. You know, yeah. I really am. I appreciate people that like Pete Jesperson who have like these great memories of
Yeah.
great. They're like an encyclopedia, and they have, even though there were years of kind of blurry alcohol stuff,
Right.
you know, they still somehow retained a lot of it. And for me, it's a lot of it's bits and pieces from when I was drinking, and you know, in the band. I obviously remember a lot of it in the feeling of it and how fun it was and all that, but like little details of other things that were going on, where we were, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, man, I really appreciate the people that kind of were around and documented that, either
Yeah.
in head or in book or whatever. So
You understand the benefit of keeping a diary as you get later on.
Sure.
Like, and I think it's because we were on the road, everything just feels so mundane at the time, and then it's only looking back on, you're like, oh, that was kind of a crazy day that day where I wish I had better memories of what happened.
yeah, is it way more mundane now? You know?
Yeah. What about bands like Willful Neglect and kind of the hardcore scene that started a little bit earlier? I know you guys had kind of already moved on sound wise, but was there kind of like, because there is like a hardcore scene that eventually like really starts getting going in Minnesota, kind of in your guys' wake.
Yeah, and again, it's like my absorption of it was probably waning, but I was aware, and it was really cool that stuff was going on, and I know there has been, you know, just, I mean, it's inevitable, like how when we started coming up, there was no punk bands at all. And then Jay's Longhorn comes along. Well, there was like the Suicide Commandos before us. I think the Suburbs started before us, but very few. The Flaming O's, I think, were another one. But that was it for our kind of new wave punk, you know. But then, you know, we come along, and then other bands, like you said, kind of come along, and this is happening in a lot of cities, you know, across the country. So it just inevitably, you know, kids see that, and then they're going to go in take that and go into another direction. So
Yeah.
it's cool that a lot of stuff gets spurned and the torch gets passed.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, especially with you guys too. Like I don't think this episode might ever come out. Not this episode, I mean, but the episode I did with them. But I did an interview with Pin on Gunpowder, which is Billy Joe Armstrong from Green Day's band. Okay. And he was talking about how when he heard the Replacements, that was like the moment where everything changed for him. And just like,
really?
Yeah, that was like where he just kind of was like, this is what I want to do. And I want to write these types of songs.
Was he what does he play? Is he the singer dude or?
Yeah, the singer guitar player guy.
That's what I thought. Yeah. I wasn't completely familiar with their names. Obviously I know Green Day, but that's cool. I had no idea. Yeah. You know what? When I listen to them, sometimes I hear Stiff Little Fingers.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
There had to be some sort of every time that's kind of sounding like a Stiff Little Fingers.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Jake Burns was on the show a couple months ago, and it was fascinating talking to him about just sort of like how punk hit Belfast, and it was just like all the kids that had kind of been locked away for years by the Troubles finally felt like they were able to come free. And it's like same sort of thing, obviously completely different circumstances than Minneapolis, where you just have so many unbelievable bands come out in such a short period from that scene.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, no, it's I appreciate I'm glad we did something around here. You know, whatever it was that was happening in our city. But God, if I think about the feeling of what it was, but it was I think it was just again for me and probably for so many other people around the country, you know, just the aesthetics, the attitude, the sound, the different production, you know, the tempo of punk was just so damn new and fun and different. Even though, again, like, there was the Trash Man, which I think was a Minneapolis band too.
They were, I think, right?
And but
I didn't know that.
It's just all of a sudden there's a bunch of this stuff happening. Everything, the look, the whole thing, and it's immediate, and you want to be part of it. So, God, I think we were not alone in that. Whether it was Minneapolis or the world.
Yep.
Basically, it was a cool movement. It's funny how you'll hear stuff now that you thought, man, punk's never going to get into the mainstream, and then now you hear shit on commercials and stuff. It's like,
right,
it's so weird.
But it's so cool because it's still because of the ethos of anyone can do it. And like we talked about, I think this last time, Chris and John, you and I have talked about this many times, where you don't need any ability. It's just like the inspiration before any ability to actually do the thing comes into play.
Right.
It's still kind of like a vital thing for young people, and there's still active young people seen. So it's not just this sort of thing that's been co-opted and nostalgized into mainstream culture. It's still got some power to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I appreciate things more now, and it could be because maybe I've been out of it for a long time, but like when I'll hear, man, I'll just like hear like a hardcore band, if I'm listening to College Raid or whatever the hell where it pops on, or if I'm hanging out with Hazelmeyer and he puts something on, and it's just there's an appreciation maybe that I have now for probably that energy of youth as well. That when I listen to our stuff, the early stuff, I think it would take a lot for me to play at that speed with that energy again.
Right.
So even just on that energy level, aside from the sound and just that's a very enticing, cool thing to kind of rediscover.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome.
I think I'm going to do a punk rock record next. That's what I'm trying to say.
Do it. I think your new record's punk rock. Like, I think that's the thing about punk rock, that it's just like, obviously hardcore comes along and there's a speed element to it, but prior to that, it could be the Spooks, the Suburbs, the Suicide Commandos, yourselves, Husker Du. It could be Tulsa Jacks, as we talked about last time. It could be anything.
I appreciate that. That's good to know. Yeah, it's good to know that there's some energy still there. One thing I do want to investigate is like like a band like The Move. Some of that 60s pop that all of a sudden came along, where it was early Who as well, which has a little bit of a punk feel to it. Yeah. But it's like a pop sensibility with some grit and like busy drums and shit like that you can feel bands are trying to reach to a different place.
Right.
Away from the rudimentary 3-chord blues-based rock song, that was early at the time. Like maybe the psychedelics come in, maybe like Sid Barrett, as well, all of that stuff, some of the early Brit psychedelic pop that had a punk edge to it.
Right.
I want to investigate a lot more of those bands, because every time I hear it, it's like, and I don't know if it was something that I absorbed because, I was born in 61. And so then you're growing up and you hear things and you absorb them very early. So it's like when you're still a fresh sponge. So there's that inside me that I kind of want to investigate in, I don't know, I as an avenue maybe to explore. So yeah, it would be fun.
Absolutely.
Well,
get some busy drums going.
There you go.
No more tube on that bass drum.
Right, exactly. Yep, we're taking the tube away.
John, do you have any more questions?
I didn't have a question, but I wanted to leave you with this final thing that I was reminded of when I was listening to the Tim and Don't Tell a Soul remixes and your new record, and the drums just sound amazing. And I was reminded of do you remember a band called the Spinanes from back in the day?
Oh,
it was a duo, guitar and drums. Anyway, they made their first record. I think they made it in the AMRET basement. The dental office there. And so Rebecca is the singer, and Superchunk toured with the Spinanes back, in the 90s. And she told me this really funny story that, she was she was with some friends, and they were all rock and roll kids, and they were getting drunk in a bar, and I think in Portland, and they're having a very intense conversation about who's the best rock and roll drummer. And it went on, and she had, I guess, finally had enough, and she said, I got up on a table and I just said, Chris Mars is the best fucking drummer in the world.
Oh man.
And so I concur.
Wow. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, no, that's cool. That's cool. It's just, it too. Like we all have our style, and John, your drumming is awesome.
Oh,
what I've seen you do, and so it's just so cool. So yeah, I appreciate that.
You got to hear Psychotic Norman. That's John. I got some deep cut John records. I can turn you on to.
I want to hear it.
It's Talk about busy drumming.
Yeah.
Well, and also Ween makes their first ever tape appearance on a compilation with Psychotic Norman. So there's some
really.
That's right.
I love Ween. Yeah.
There you go. Well,
there's a band with no rules. I mean,
right.
Fuck yeah,
they were on Twin Tone at one point, right? Early,
were they? I don't.
There was something on Twin Tone.
Were they? My God, yeah, I remember seeing. I saw Ween a couple times. Like his ability to like change the tone of his voice and sing just like in these different.
That's crazy.
God, yeah, he's a great singer, great guitar player. Yep, cool stuff.
And they came out of punk and hardcore. They did like a punk and hardcore. Well, this tape compilation was Dean Ween put out and did like a
City Gardens.
Yeah, Social Decay, old Hogan's Heroes split, I think, tape as well. So some deep New York hardcore, New Jersey hardcore.
That's right.
I remember my brother who was never, I love him, and he was always musically on a different plane.
Yeah.
But I did turn him on to some punk, and he still likes, to this day. So, but I did turn him. I said, here, just listen to this, and it was Piss Up a Rope.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was just rolling. No, then he became a Ween fan too. So.
Right.
I hear more of that.
Well, anytime you want to come back on here, Chris, and talk, and John, you're always welcome on here.
I love it.
I'm going to leave you the final words.
Hey, man, thank you, Damian, for having me and John on again, and it's really cool, laid back, conversational. I had a great time. So nice to meet you, John.
You too, man. I just want to, what a huge influence, and just thank you for everything you do.
You're welcome, and thank you. I appreciate all of it. And sorry I couldn't have a visual. God damn it! I wanted to see you. It's so funny because my visual on this end cut out too. So I've been talking to the word Zoom the whole time. So the word Zoom the whole time. So